You know, I realized I haven't exactly been very active on this YouTube channel, and I do apologize for that. We'll see what happens next year, but I hope I can make more videos sometime in the next year. It's just I've been so busy with other priorities that I haven't been able to make YouTube videos very often. But in any case, let's get to it. 2019. How was it in terms of animation? Overall, I'd say pretty good. It seems that there's an unwritten rule when it comes to animation that animation studios always tend to put out some of their best work at the end of the decade. And I can gladly agree with that consensus. But in a year of good, there is also gonna be some bad. And these animated movies just straight up weren't good. They were pretty bad. And we're gonna take a look at why exactly they didn't work out as planned. And keep in mind, this is a subjective list. If you like any of the animated movies that I named, that's completely fine. Movies are subjective art forms, and not everyone is gonna agree with everybody about personal opinions. But in any case, let's get to it. These are my top 5 worst animated movies of 2019. Here we go. Number 5. You know, for the past few years I've been reviewing animated movies, I've discovered that the animated movie I was most disappointed with that year always ends up on my worst list. For 2017, it was Lego Ninjago, and for 2018, it was Smallfoot. But for this year, I don't think there was any animated movie that was more disappointing than The Addams Family. Man, this was a movie that should have worked in the end. It had the perfect ingredients to make a new animated Halloween classic. You got some really good artists working on the movie, a great cast, as well as some great source material to base your film off of. What could possibly go wrong? Well, it's basically simple. You make your animated movie boring. And that's the complete opposite of what the Addams Family should be. They're not a boring family. They're in fact very, very interesting because of how creepy and kooky they are. But sadly, this film really failed to understand it because it gave itself a plot that was so basic and generic that it ended up really sinking the film. I also want to add that the jokes in this film were also amazingly unfunny. The theater I saw it in had a pretty decent sized crowd, and this film did not get a single laugh in the theater, and that's saying something. Yet despite how this movie didn't exactly do well with critics and audiences, it still made a pretty decent chunk at the box office because, no joke, 4 days after the movie came out, MGM announced a sequel. Well, all I'll say is, let's hope that this sequel is a lot better than this first film because it has a lot to offer given how disappointing this film was. The family may be creepy and kooky, but this film surely ain't. Number 4. This year was not exactly the best year for Nickelodeon. They made some weird decisions this year. They bought the full franchise rights to Garfield, they announced a Baby Shark cartoon, and most infamously, they greenlit 2 SpongeBob spin-offs. But you know what? Out of all 3 of those choices, I can see at least something good coming out of it. If you want my honest opinion, the worst decision they made this year was putting this film out in theaters. This was an animated movie that was pretty much doomed from the start. Though I could at least tell what Nickelodeon was trying to do with this film. They were trying to launch a new animated TV show, just like what they did with Jimmy Neutron back in 2001. But unlike Jimmy Neutron, which had a smooth production as far as I know, Wonder Park hit a big snag during production that it just could not recover from. In 2018, Paramount fired the original director from the film, apparently due to sexual harassment allegations, and they decided not to credit a new director. And honestly, that lack of a director really shows because the movie is just really boring and bland and also has a surprising lack of direction overall. But there is one thing about this movie that really pushed me over the edge and made me grew to hate it over time. The reason why I hate this movie is because the animal characters yell at our protagonist for creating the darkness, which is apparently ruining the theme park of the film. And the reason this darkness was created was because the main character got depressed because she thought of her mother who was dying in the hospital of cancer. Yeah, I seriously have no idea how anyone thought this was a good idea. It was just a really awful, mean-spirited thought, and it just really bogged down the movie for me. And as far as that TV show goes that Nickelodeon is planning, there actually have been rumors that the show might have been quietly canceled because this movie ended up being a massive failure. I wouldn't be surprised if that was true. In any case, Wonder Park will go down as being one of the worst animated movies released by Nickelodeon. How anyone thought this movie would be a good idea, I will never understand. Number 3. You know what's a lesson I learned watching movies this decade? Not everything will make a good animated movie. After the Lego Movie came out in 2014, a lot of animation studios have been trying to capitalize its success, and each one of them have failed. And while there have been worse movies that have come out that have tried to capitalize on that film's success, Playmobil the movie is probably going to be one of the most infamous. This film had one of the worst openings in box office history in the United States. And honestly, I was not very surprised to see how low those numbers got, because the American distributor clearly knew they had a dud on their hands. They pushed the movie all the way back to December, gave it very little marketing, and also badly mismarketed this movie by trying to make Daniel Radcliffe the main character even though he wasn't. Though I am honestly not surprised for them not putting any effort into marketing this film because it really is terrible. Despite having a legendary Disney animator on board writing and directing this movie, it's amazingly written and directed at such an amateur level. Nothing about it seems amazing or innovative. Not to mention that this was one of the worst animated musicals of the entire decade, and that is saying a lot. These songs just aren't finished. Let's face it, even in a world where the Lego Movie didn't exist, this film would probably still suck. In the future, I can see this film getting the same kind of reputation that the toys it was based on gets, to be seen as inferior to the competition. Number 2. You know, if this film came out any other year, it probably would have been my number 1. I mean, there's no way around it. This film is terrible. But the only reason it's not at my number 1 spot is because at the beginning of the year, I saw an animated movie that was worse than this. But you know what? I feel like it's time to bash on an easy target. Because, let's face it, one way or another, this film was just absolutely terrible. Arctic Dogs is an animated movie that should not have been released in theaters. I don't really know why it was. If this was just a direct-to-DVD animated movie, it'd probably be quickly forgotten about. But for some reason, this film got a theatrical release, and man, it bombed badly. And honestly, I can't say I blame it because it looked awful. It's once again one of those awful animated movies where an underdog protagonist wants to have a dream job, gets shut out from it, and then has to go up against a pretty big, bad, evil villain in order to prove himself. You can't make a much more generic plot than this. Not only that, the animation is awful, it looked even worse on the big screen, and these characters have nothing relatable about them. They're just terrible. I mentioned this in my review, but I only saw this film with only one person who brought his small daughter with him, and half an hour in, they walked out and didn't come back. And honestly, I can't say I blame them. It's just a terrible movie. If there is one possible silver lining to come out of this film, it's that it bombed so badly at the box office, it'll finally convince Hollywood to stop putting these direct-to-DVD animated movies in theaters. We can only hope. As is, Arctic Dogs will go down as being one of the most embarrassing animated movies released in theaters. Before I get to my number 1 pick, here are some dishonorable mentions. The Secret Life of Pets 2, an Illumination film that really ended up being a mess. This was essentially a movie with 3 subplots that were very badly tied together, and it ended up just being an unfunny and clunky mess. The only reason this isn't on my list is because I did find the movie mostly harmless, and I did get a laugh out of Harrison Ford, but unfortunately, this was not a good sequel. Let's hope that the 2020s are a much better decade for Illumination. I don't think Ugly Dolls was nearly as bad as what some people have said about it, but this film was still pretty unimpressive overall. The story didn't have much under the surface, the songs were forgettable, and This film further proved to me that pop stars should not be casted in major roles in animated movies. There's a reason Kelly Clarkson gave up acting after she made From Justin to Kelly. But yeah, I don't think this movie is nearly as bad as what some people have said, but it's still really unimpressive and pretty boring. Alright, now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's get to it. Number 1. Look, I don't like bashing on animated movies. It's not fun for me to be negative, but I have to be honest as a critic. And I will say this about all the previous animated movies that I mentioned. All of them I can see working in some capacity. They just didn't end up working in the end and ended up being really bad. But this number 1 pick, though, I have no regrets on hating. I can say this without hesitation. This film straight up shouldn't have been made. I feel it's pretty redundant to talk about Norma the North these days. I mean, there have been so many reviews bashing on this awful, awful animated movie that there's really not much for me to say about it. But this sequel, Norma the North, Keys to the Kingdom, I straight up don't understand why it exists. The first film is often regarded as being one of the most universally despised animated movies of all time, so what convinced Lionsgate to greenlight a second film, let alone put it in theaters? I will have no clue. But I can say this though, it really is worse than the first film in every single capacity. The animation is even worse than the first film. The characters are still stupid. And the story is just a straight up mess. They clearly took their 2 sequel ideas that they just did not finish and tried to combine them together for one full effect, and man did it backfire in a bad manner. This seriously is one of the worst animated movies I have ever seen this decade, and that is saying a lot. Screw Norma the North, Keys to the Kingdom. The worst animated movie of 2019. Well, that does it for the worst list. Join in next time where I talk about the best animated movies of 2019. And fortunately enough, we got a lot of good ones, so it should be a lot more fun. Guys, thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. I just want to let you guys know that, in fact, I did open up a Patreon account. So if you want to read my movie reviews early, as well as see my videos out a few days before I release them to the public, plus you can get some cool rewards and exclusive content I won't be offering anywhere else. So if you want to go support me over there, feel free. I appreciate any kind of support. But in any case, thank you guys so much for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. Look forward to seeing my best animated movies list very, very soon. Until then, this is the Animated Antic, and take care.